Matthew 11 verse 12. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffered violence, and the violent taketh it by force. This is one of the most misrepresented or most misinterpreted scriptures in the Bible. Very wrongly interpreted. Now, what comes into your mind when you read this place is that the kingdom suffered violence, and the violent taketh it by. But that's not it. This is King James translation, and this translation is not absolutely correct on this verse. Do you have another translation?
From the time John preached his message.
From the time John preached his message.
Until this very day.
Until this very day.
The kingdom of heaven has suffered violent attacks.
The kingdom of heaven has suffered violent attacks.
Violent men try to seize it.
And violent men trying to seize it. It's different from what you are reading here. There is no man on earth that God begs you to prosper. Any man that wants to prosper, prospers by absolute force. I'll show you. But I want you to understand something. Read Amplified.
From the days of John the Baptist.
From the days of John the Baptist.
Until now.
Until now.
The kingdom of heaven.
The kingdom of heaven.
Suffers violent assault.
Suffers violent assault.
Violent men seize it by force.
And violent men seize it by force. Do you know what he's talking about? What is the next verse after this? Verse 13. What did he say in verse 13? Let me show you. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. Now let me give you an understanding. Who is John the Baptist? That's the one we call the forerunner of Christ. The one who came in the spirit of Elijah to announce the coming of the Messiah, whose name is Yeshua. Who came in the spirit of Elijah. The Bible says he was the grace of God made available to Zechariah and Elizabeth that had waited on God for years. And Zechariah, being a priest, had an encounter with God. And by that encounter, the wife conceived. And John was bettered. You know that story too well. Now, John came in that strength. Along the line, John began to abuse the heads of government. And somehow, John was arrested. And John was put in prison, detained in prison. Pay attention. And while in prison, John trusted God for his release. John waited for his release. John prayed for his release. John sent messages to Jesus, letting him know that he was detained. But eventually he was not aware, but Christ knew all things, so he knew that John was in prison. John thought that because he was a prophet, John thought that because of the virtue of grace and mandate on him, that he was not permitted to stay in prison. How can he, John, the prophet who announced the coming of Christ, be the one in prison, and the one he announced is coming is going about doing good, healing the sick, delivering people, and the person who announced him is in trouble? How can I be in trouble? And the God whom I announce is saving others from trouble, and he has not saved me. John one day said to himself, go and ask that man, did I make a mistake? Are you sure you are the one to come, or is there another? That statement was born out of frustration. John had waited and waited and waited and waited until he ran out of patience, until he could not hold his strength anymore. That was why John cried out. And John felt, maybe by pouring out my heart to him, that he will remember me. When the disciples got to Jesus and said to Jesus, John is in prison. Master, we have reached you severally, but you don't want to help us. John said, we should ask you, Are you the one, or is he another to come? He said of Jesus to pity him, because in the kingdom there's no pity. In this kingdom, that's why I want to say some certain things to you. The problem with you is your emotions, and God is not emotional. The problem with you is your emotion. There are things I want to bring up. Pay attention. Jesus said, what seest thou? They said the blind sees, the lame walks, the deaf hears. He said, go and tell John that before now he was the greatest of all born of a woman. Why was he the greatest? Isaiah was a major prophet. What made Isaiah a major prophet? Because he prophesied the coming of Jesus. Jeremiah was a major prophet. Why? Because he prophesied the coming of Jesus. Ezekiel. There are prophets called major and minor prophets. Minor prophets are those prophets in the Old Testament who never spoke about the coming of Jesus. Why? The major prophets are those prophets who prophesied the coming of Jesus. Anybody who was privileged by grace to see the coming of Christ by revelation was considered to be a major prophet. But John did not see it by revelation. John saw him physically and knew that he's the one. Because John was the first man to see him physically and recognize that he is the one. That made John the greatest of all born of a woman. Because he was the first that grace was made available to see him. He became the greatest. Mind you that this same John came in the spirit of Elijah. This John came in the spirit of Elijah, because it was prophesied that Elijah will come before he will come. That some of you may not understand this. Let me not go there. Now, he said, of all born of a woman, John was the greatest. But because he doubted me, the least in the kingdom, the smallest in the kingdom shall be greater than John. Therefore, he now said, before now, from the days of John, the kingdom of God has suffered insults. The kingdom has suffered insults like characters like John. He said, but from now, henceforth, the kingdom will suffer insult no more. Let every man carry their cross on their head. That is what it means. The kingdom suffered violent, and the violent take